Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Taschi Talks. Taschi, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Now, our ding-dong Dan has been missing in action all day, but he recently came out with a statement and he said, quote unquote, "There is no excuse for the terrible behaviour we have seen in our city over the last 2 days. Acts of violence and disruption won't," and get this one, Tash, "won't result in one less case of COVID." That's how deluded this guy is.
Right.
All right, so it's all about cases, nothing to do with anything else. It's just case. So today, we're going to unpack something that's going to be really important. There's been a lot of media rhetoric about the labelling of these construction workers and what they're doing. You and me and everyone with half a brain notice that these people are men and women, but mostly men in the construction industry. They are concerned about these mandatory jabs. The media tries to point it out as, you know, something to do with their tea rooms and whatnot, but everyone knows that's a load of rubbish. These are men, these are our mates, our neighbours, our football coaches, people that we know on a daily basis, and they are being portrayed and labelled in some of the worst kind of language that we can see. Nazis, far-right extremists. And tonight, Tashi's going to unpack this and actually expose a far more sinister agenda behind the play that you won't see anywhere else. So, Tashi, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, what a day yesterday outside the CFMEU Union Building. We do have men, brothers, husbands, sons, who are tradies, who are concerned about this mandatory no jab, no job policy. And they went to the union to really voice their concerns. And what actually happened is John Setka came out, didn't say much, then went away, then went on a radio program and basically called them extremists. He then went on telly and used, as you said, a number of rhetoric, which is highly irresponsible, calling them I think it was Bill Shorten who said man baby Nazis.
Nazis, yeah.
John Setka said rent a crowd, professional protesters, neo-Nazis, anti-vaxxer activists, drunken morons, deplorable, and that they're not doing the right thing. I don't think it's the right thing to use such inflammatory rhetoric. They then put out it's on the screen here, a media release where the CFMEU condemns far-right extremist violence. And what I want to do in tonight's podcast is show to the audience, and I hope a lot of tradies listen, that this language by John Setka is very deliberate, and it plays into a piece of legislation that's in the Victorian Parliament at the moment to extend the Domestic Terrorism Act. We'll have a look at a little bit at that act, and we'll look at a little bit around how Dan Andrews, I think, and John Setka together, that there's stuff behind the scenes. We have signed up, or Melbourne has been signed up to the Strong Cities Network that requires that this is a network that's anti-extremism apparently, and we'll look at how it has how it's all playing out. I want people to understand the context and to contextualise the language that's being used so that they can know exactly what they're protesting against and exactly what else is out there that is of importance to them.
Yeah, what's playing behind the scenes. So many times what we see on the mainstream media is just the narrative that's being pushed. And every time we see the mainstream media pushing a narrative, everyone just needs to question, okay, what's really going on? The mainstream media is nothing but a propaganda mouthpiece for the government. But what they're trying to do is create this narrative of extremism, far-right extremism, neo-Nazis, things that have been on the mainstream media over the last couple of days, even going back to Saturday's protest, and then what happened at the CFMEU building, and then what happened today as well. So you'll see more and more of this rhetoric being announced out there, and tonight we're going to expose exactly what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. So Victoria, so here's an article in the West Australian. I couldn't find anything in Victoria media that was covering this at all. It's a Vic bill introduced to counter extremism, right? This was only a few days ago, September the 14th. This is a new program designed to tackle the root cause of violent extremism and radicalisation, could be introduced in Victoria. This is because the Terrorism Community Protection Amendment Bill 2021 was tabled in Parliament on Tuesday last week, and it will establish a voluntary case management scheme for people who are at risk of radicalising towards violent extremism.
Wow.
Right.
So this is just this is on what date was that, Tash?
This is September the 14th. So a week ago.
I'm surprised Parliament was even open. You watch them scramble and get their the independence in just to try to pass something like this. So this is really interesting. So nothing in Melbourne's media, but take hats off to Perth media for actually even drawing this to our attention.
Yeah. So what this does is it's passed the first and second reading, and it extends the operation of the Terrorism Act 2003 for a further 10 years, keeping in place vital counter-terrorism preventative and investigative powers that were due to expire on December the 1st, 2021. So
that's interesting. That's very sorry to interrupt you, Tash. That's interesting. So this law was put in place after 9/11, 2003. There's been a lack of terrorism in place. It's due to expire. It almost sounds like that. It almost reminds me of the omnibus extension. We have laws that are about to expire or need to be amended to facilitate Andrews and his extremist sort of actions in Victoria. So he used the omnibus to extend it, and now this bill is about to expire in December 2021. But we need to create an environment to justify the extension, right?
It would certainly seem that way.
Wow.
I'll look at it a bit more. There's another article, Mirage News. So countering violent extremism to keep Victoria safe. Now it says here it's a new world-leading scheme.
Ooh, you'd love that.
So we'll come back to Dan Andrews. Likes his world-leading schemes. He's very much entwined with the World Economic Forum and globalists. And I think Melbourne may well be a test case for some of these world-leading schemes. This bit's quite interesting. It's for individuals who cannot be engaged. So what it does is it sets up, you can go on like a plan, like an intervention plan to stop you thinking terrorist stuff and extreme things. So for individuals who cannot be engaged voluntarily and require intervention, the bill also sets out a support and engagement order scheme. This allows the courts to impose conditions on a person identified to be radicalising towards violent extremism, where they must comply with a tailored support and engagement plan. So basically, you can volunteer because it's totally voluntary, but if you don't volunteer, we're going to stick an order on you.
Okay, wait a second. So you can volunteer and put your hand up and saying, hey, I'm being radicalised, but if I don't, the court can impose it on you.
Correct.
This is support and engagement order. SEO. Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Go ahead, Tash.
Now, the bill also means that information, that's data, that's my game, can be more easily shared between agencies for case management. Now, that's called a whole of government approach. The whole of something is the total of something. We're looking at something that's rather totalitarian. We're looking at, when it comes to violent extremism, early intervention is key. This is your predictive programming, predictive policing. We're going to identify you before you've done anything and help you get your life back on track. Right?
Wow, I'm generous.
Yeah. Now, so this is all stated by Minister for Police Lisa Neville. So they're all in on it. I'm going to go to the legislation now. So what I've gone to now is actually the legislation itself, right? Now, bear with me. Reading legislation is never fun. It's quite boring, right? But I'm going to try and bring it to life.
You've gone through 150 pages here, I think, Tash. There's page 1 of 150. So give us the juice. What's the good bits? Okay,
the good bits are. Okay, so I'm in the Act. I'm on page 8, and we're going to talk about the meaning of extremist material that a reasonable person would understand to be directly or indirectly encouraging, glorifying, promoting, or condoning a terrorist act, right? Yeah. Except for the purposes of that, so that's this bit here in yellow, but for the purposes of subsection 1 above, it does not matter whether a particular terrorist act is or can be identified in or from the material.
Okay, so...
So extreme. So
you got to repeat that because that just sounds so dumb.
Okay, so extreme. You can be reading extremist material that a reasonable person would understand to be promoting or glorifying a terrorist act, but in that material, it doesn't actually matter whether or not a terrorist act is or can be identified in that material. So what does this cover here? Does this cover like reading like 1984 or Brave New World or I don't know, anything.
Or listening to this podcast.
Yeah, well, and who is a reasonable person anymore? Because I don't think the people making the decisions are actually very reasonable anymore.
Well, that's what I was going to say too, Tash, because a reasonable person, like you turn on the mainstream media and then you see some of the comments on mainstream media about some of the things that have been happening over the last couple of days, and they are so against people standing up for the human rights. So these people are probably seen as quote unquote reasonable people. As the media just promotes ad nauseum, time and time again, their rhetoric, they look at people like you and me, and they will probably see us as extremists.
Potentially, because let's have a look here. So let's look at how a person, the definition of a person who may be radicalizing towards violent extremism, right?
Yep.
So this is where it says here, for the purposes of this part, a person may be radicalizing towards violent extremism, even though they have not identified or considered a particular act, like a terrorist act, even though they have not done an act in preparation for or in the planning of a terrorist act, even though they have not possessed or had under their control a thing that is connected with the preparation for or the engagement of a person in a terrorist act, even though they have not committed an offence.
So this is pre-crime, all right? This is Minority Report in our face, basically.
Yeah.
Wow.
Let's go to the next bit. Let's go to the next bit, page 12. Okay, so what actually is behavior, radicalizing behavior? Well, it says here, it's the intention of advancing a political, religious, or ideological cause.
That's a definition of violent extremism.
Well, it's the definition of radicalizing towards violent extremism.
Okay, so Tash, let me ask you a question. If you disagree with Daniel Andrews, is that considered advancing a political position?
Well, I mean, this is an act, so this would need to be taken to a lawyer to go through it. But yeah, I mean, it kind of says right there, it's very broad, right?
Yeah. So if you have a faith that is radicalizing towards violent extremism.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just, I'm not a lawyer, right? But to me, that seems like a catch-all for anything.
That is such a vague comment. And that, like you said, it's a catch-all. They will use this to justify any of their behaviors towards us.
Yeah. Now, the other thing is you can be radicalizing towards violent extremism if you associating with individuals already radicalized towards violent extremism. So you're just guilty by association now. That is guilt by association.
So everybody, unsubscribe from all these channels. Unsubscribe from our Rumble, our Facebook, everything, because Tash and I don't want to be guilty of radicalizing you, because we don't want you to associate with us. Okay.
Now, the premise of this is that, if, and look, some people are vulnerable in the community, right? I'm not going to say that they're not. And the premise of this is supposed to be that, they can help you. These programs or these intervention orders can help you, right? Now, they've identified here that, the underlying cause of a person radicalizing towards violent extremism might be unemployment, the use of drugs or alcohol, mental illness, homelessness, or social isolation.
Jeez, none of that's happening these days, is it?
No. Gee, the government response to COVID, that deadly disease, that's not causing, huge unemployment. It's not putting pressure on people around drugs and alcohol.
Okay,
mental illness, I mean, homelessness, my goodness, this is, they're creating the conditions that they have identified would or potentially cause someone to radicalize towards violent extremism. So they're creating the conditions for it.
Creating the market again.
Yep.
I bet you you're going to tie this to social impact bonds down the track, aren't you?
I am, yeah. So here we are, CVE. So that stands for Countering Violent Extremism.
Ladies and gentlemen, CVE, that's going to be a term that you're going to hear so much in the very near future. So just keep that there. CVE, Countering Violent Extremism. And Tash, what was PVE?
Preventing Violent Extremism.
So CVE is countering and PVE is preventing. So Keep those in your vocab.
Now, here you go. This is talking about when they're at court, whether they're going to accept a referral into the system. So a referred person is at risk of radicalising towards violent extremism, or you can also accept the referral if the person is radicalising. So you don't even need to be radicalising towards violent extremism. You can just be at risk of it. Like I say, total pre-crime.
Wow.
And then the final one I want, page 57, whether or not you're radicalising towards violent extremism can be assessed in the court. Now it says here, the court may find that a person is radicalising towards violent extremism, whether or not the court finds that the person is preparing to commit a terrorist act.
Okay.
So you are not a terrorist. You haven't done anything. You're not committing. So they're conflating extremism and terrorism under one bill, but they are actually very different things, right? Now it says here that the standard of proof is any question of fact to be decided by a court under this division is to be decided on the balance of probabilities. So you're probably one. It's just very vague.
Wow. So let me just read that. The court may find that a person is radicalising towards violent extremism, whether or not the court finds that the person is preparing to commit a terrorist act. And so it's based on probability. So they don't even have to prove it. They just think, okay, based on probability, you might be doing it, therefore you are. Wow. Okay. Wow.
Now, I just want to say here, right, so when it comes to counterterrorism legislation, they did actually review it back in 2014. And I mean, I remember 2014, everything was sweet, right? We really don't have a problem with it. So they actually had a public hearing on 2014. However, due to the lower than expected number of submissions provided and the fact that none of the submitters wished to appear at a public hearing, the committee agreed to cancel the public hearing. I mean, it was such a non-problem.
This whole terrorism problem, right? That's what you're referring to? Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Back in 2014, when they were looking at, what should we extend it? Like, no one really paid any attention because we had such a lovely, beautiful city. Now,
we're probably in probably 3 or 4 of the world's most livable city at that time, right?
Yeah. Now let's talk about strong cities. Daniel Andrews has signed Melbourne up to an organisation called Strong Cities. This is a global network of cities that are what they do is they counter violent extremism. That's the whole idea of them. Now, when they talk about Melbourne, and there's other cities in the world with lots of problems, but when they talk about Melbourne, they said Victoria is one of the world's most successful and cohesive multicultural nations and is frequently recognised as one of the world's most livable cities.
Can I just stop there? As a bit of a grammar geek, Victoria is one of the most. So Victoria is one of the most multicultural nations and one of the world's most livable cities. Geez, who wrote this to?
I know. As someone from overseas, and that's the point, right? Exactly. This is not a local initiative. They have signed us up to a foreign initiative, a foreign network, right, that are involved in rolling out countering violent extremism in Melbourne.
CVE. There you go. Those buzzwords.
Yeah, but Melbourne didn't have a problem until John Setka declared one today.
Ooh. Right. There you go. So he declared the fact that we've got violent extremism in Melbourne now.
And
after
in fact,
2014, it wasn't even an issue that they didn't even have a public hearing to amend this bill.
Yep. Now, when the people were standing outside, the tradies were standing outside the Union building, actually there weren't really many police there. They were pretty much free to demonstrate. Now, as soon as John Setka went on air and said, they're extremists, if you'll notice, that's when the Port Police arrived.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's the public order response team.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this Smart Cities, Strong Cities Network Global Summit, they actually hosted this in Victoria in 2018. And what this all delivered was it strengthened international local capacity, knowledge sharing and learning, innovative, relevant and practical training. And it reported that the summit improved their ability to create CVE initiatives. So we had a summit in 2018, and then this, ability to create CVE initiatives gets rolled out into a bill in Parliament at the moment, and we have, according to John Setka, violent extremists on the street.
Interesting. It's very deliberate language, isn't it?
It's very deliberate language. Now, this is where I just have to kind of like roll my eyes, because this is the strong cities. It's all about creating peace in our cities. Yeah, hashtag peace in our cities. Oh, they're doing a good job, right?
Yeah, just turn on the TV. Crazy.
So, I mean, this is, everything is inverted nowadays. It's
upside down world. Upside down world.
Yeah. Now, the PVE and the countering violent extremism is, and it says here, right, it's tied to the United Nations General Assembly Sustainable Development Goals, and it's tied here to Sustainable Development Goal 16. Now, for anyone, not everyone listening to this podcast will understand or know what Agenda 2030 is, but it's an agenda that is clearly outlined by the United Nations and being rolled out by the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum. And I think it seems here they're taking over our city.
Yeah, it's plain. It's really plain. It even lists the agenda that it's referring to, right?
Yeah. Now, you did ask me if I was going to tie this to impact investing. I'm not going to talk about this in this podcast because it will be too long, but all our other podcasts talk about impact investing and how money can be made from this.
Oh, wow.
Now, Dan Andrews is definitely on board with the World Economic Forum. We saw that in episode 5 that we did, where he is doing sustainable development goals around mental health.
Yeah.
Smarter investment. This is from the World Economic Forum. Smarter investment can help prevent violent extremism. Here's how. Now, I won't go into the detail, but I want to pull out a key point here. But any investment is only as smart as its impact.
And there it is. There's the key words there again, right?
Yeah.
So this is another market they're creating, violent extremism. They're actually creating, even after 2014, where they said there's absolutely, it's a no-go, it's a no-brainer. It's not happening in our city. We don't even have to amend legislation, to the point where they are now, it seems, and one can argue, that they are creating this market for impact investment bonds, this extremism.
Well, I would like to dig a bit more time, and I haven't had much time. I thought I'd release this after yesterday, so it would be interesting to see this world-leading scheme and who the interested parties are in this world-leading scheme. We never had a problem. We're such a beautiful, multicultural city. I hope we can keep that, and we can keep standing up for one another. We can keep seeing what is right and what is decent, and certainly, having a government decide what injections you have, it just, if you want to have it, fine, absolutely. But if you don't, I think that's a fairly normal human right that should be preserved. Yeah. It certainly doesn't warrant the rhetoric that John Setka used. And I think this podcast, I hope I've showed that there is the stuff at play. John Setka chose those words very, very carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Tash, thank you for outlining this. And Tash and I had a bit of a chat before tonight's episode. We don't want to discourage people protesting and defending their human rights. But the goal of this whole episode was to actually show the deeper game at play here. Okay, they want to define us as extremists. They have social impact bonds in place to deal with countering violent extremism.
It would seem so. I need to dig into that a bit more.
Yeah.
But the language, all the clues are there, and like I said, it is a voluntary thing, unless it's not voluntary. So I don't want to put people off too much, because we do have the law on our side, and what they're asking for, the tradies, isn't anything outlandish. No, it's just the ability to work and without having to have an injection. That's fairly normal. We do need to stand up for our rights. That's my view. I don't want to put people off. I just want everyone needs to be educated and understand what's going on. I hope people find this interesting.
Absolutely, and for all our listeners, please send this to, if you've got any friends in the construction industry or any other industries that have tensions now towards the government. please share this with family and friends and get this information out there. They want to label us as extremists because there's a big agenda at play here. So please share and subscribe this and send it far and wide, guys. It's not about us receiving views. It's about educating people. And Tash, you've educated me tonight. So thank you for your time. Thank you for taking the time to go through those 150 pages of that legislation. I'm glad it's you and not me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I know tempers are high, but what I saw, and Real Rukshan did a live stream, is these protests go on for hours and they are peaceful, right? What you see in the mainstream media is maybe one little incident of pent-up anger.
Yes.
Hours and hours of thousands and thousands of tradies and supporters who are peacefully asking that the government respect our existing human rights.
And you saw it, I don't know if you were on the live stream with Rukshan when they came down from Westgate Bridge today, where the police just lined up across the street. Did you see that today?
I didn't.
I'll probably try to dig it up and show the audience. They just basically lined up across the street and prevented the protesters from actually going back into the city. And they started firing. There was, and as you can expect, these protesters, some hurled, some objects towards the police, but they opened fire with rubber bullets, with tear gas, with their rubber canisters. So you had a situation where you had police firing on protesters on Melbourne's main freeway today. Okay.
Well, we do have to ask the question, and I think this podcast maybe answers some of that questions. Why is the Daniel Andrews government not letting people protest?
Yes.
I mean, if people have been in the city, and at that point on the Westgate Bridge, they would have been in the city for 5 hours already. Yeah. Everyone knows they're already there. It's not like you're stopping something. Yeah. Actually, all the police are doing is creating a situation that does not need to be created.
Exactly. And even Rukshan was referring to it. He's saying, I'm not sure why they're doing this. I'm not sure. He said that a number of times today. So I think some of the things that we talked about today probably touches on that and probably answers those questions. So Tash, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Until next time.
You're welcome.